Welcome to Mana's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 12. The Paladin of the Holy Kingdom. The Sorcerer King left with Nia a minute later. Caspian went, "Alright. Since the Sorcerer King is already gone, let's get to the main event." Yes. Protecting this many people at once will be very difficult. If possible, I believe we will need to borrow reinforcements from the south, or perhaps obtain some sort of transport like horses and carriages. Caspian smiled thinly as he heard Gustavo's suggestion. "What nonsense are you spouting? Who said we're talking about that? Were we not supposed to consider how to move ourselves south? Let me speak plainly. We will not flee south right away. We will do battle with Jaldabaoth's army here. That's far too rash." As she heard Gustavo's words, Remedios continued speaking. "Well, we have city walls. We'll be finished once we're surrounded and the food runs out. A siege would be foolish without reinforcements to count on." While Remedios may not have been good at thinking, she was very reliable when it came to battle. Gustavo nodded as he heard his captain's confident words. "Even so, we must fight here." As the two of them turned questioning gazes on him, Caspian smiled cruelly and explained himself. "You heard it too, right? The Sorcerer King is conserving his mana for the battle with Jaldabaoth." After seeing Gustavo nod, Caspian continued. "That would be troublesome. After he defeats Jaldabaoth and takes the maid demons, the Sorcerer King will return to the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Before that, we need to have him decrease the amount of Demi-Humans who have invaded this nation. Therefore, we must place ourselves in dire straits. But our agreement with the Sorcerer King. Every time the Sorcerer King slays several Demi-Humans with his magic, fewer people of the Holy Kingdom will be lost. No. Which will you choose? Your pact with the undead, or the lives of the Holy Kingdom's innocent civilians?" Gustavo had a bitter look on his face, while the blank-faced Remedios promptly answered. "The innocence of the Holy Kingdom, of course. That's how it is, Captain. Therefore, you must make the Sorcerer King fight. Since we have made an agreement, there must be a good reason to break it. And so we must fight Jaldabaoth's army for that." "Correct. Or rather, we began our work to flee to the south, but since we took more time than we expected, we were surrounded by Jaldabaoth's army. With no options left, we had no choice but to seek the Sorcerer King's strength. What do you think?" "He's right," Remedios and Gustavo's eyes seemed to say to each other. "However, I have a question. What if the mana that the Sorcerer King expends becomes a disadvantage during the battle with Jaldabaoth? I hear mana can be recovered quickly, no? My sister said so too." Remedios' little sister was a priestess. As she said, I heard it from her, nobody could refute it. "We'll release a few Demi-Humans on purpose and lure Jaldabaoth's army here. We need to do it before we run out of rations, remember? But how many of Jaldabaoth's men will come?" The three of them had already shared what they knew. After a series of battles, Jaldabaoth's army was less than 100,000 strong. The army was formed of 12 species, as well as 6 other species, who were not numerous enough to qualify as armies in their own right, for a total of 18 species. The 12 races were Snakemen, serpent-headed Demi-Humans, considered close relatives of lizardmen. Armors, a bipedal rat-like species with iron-like fur. They were considered close relatives of the quagga. Cabins. They resembled apes that were slightly larger than human beings, whose eyes had atrophied. Zerns, a slimy species with whose upper bodies were like eels with arms, and whose slimy lower bodies were like blue-colored maggots. Some people wondered, are you sure they aren't heteromorphs? But they were affected by spells that worked on Demi-Humans, so they were classed as Demi-Humans. Bladers, an insectal species whose fingernails sprouted knife-like blades and whose bodies were protected by an armor-like exoskeleton. Much like the Zerns, they were also affected by spells that worked on Demi-Humans, so they were classed as Demi-Humans. Horiners, Demi-Humans with horse-like legs who were adept at sprinting. They could run for long periods without rest and possessed shocking mobility. Spidings, spider-like Demi-Humans with 4 long and slender arms and legs who resembled spiders. They could spit all sorts of silk from their mouths, and make all manner of clothes and items with that silk. The silk clothing they made in this way was as hard as steel. Stone Eaters, armed with crude weapons, their most frightening feature was their ability to spit the rocks they ate. They could spit stone fragments that could easily dent metal armor, and do so at ranges in excess of 100 meters. However, they could only do that a limited number of times, so if one could weather their onslaught, they were nothing to fear. Orthros. They were a version of centaurs whose lower bodies were replaced by those of carnivorous beasts. They had better fighting power than centaurs, but conversely they were less mobile. Magillos. Born with the ability to use spells of up to the 4th tier. The spells they could use apparently appeared on their bodies like tattoos. Their more powerful members were covered in tattoos. Sometimes there were individuals who could develop skills as magic casters, and those were rumored to be able to cast spells of up to the 5th tier. They might be lord-level entities. Pteropos, a species which lived on cliffsides. They were very adept at long-distance gliding. While they could fly, it seemed to require a lot of strength, so they could only fly for a while every day, and after that they could not even glide. If they did not fly, they could rend armor with the wind, so defending against it was very difficult. There were a species which was stronger when they could not fly. And then, there were the Baffic. The remaining 6 races were not particularly numerous, but each of them was quite powerful. Ogres. Buryons. An ogre-like race with the power to control the earth, who could be considered a superior species. They possessed special abilities associated with the earth. Vaons. Similar to Buryons, they were water-controlling beings. They had water-linked special abilities. Nagarajas. They looked like snakes with scaly bodies and arms. They were a completely different species from the similarly named Nagas, and they did not get along well with the latter. They were born with the ability to cast many spells, and sometimes they would even equip themselves with swords and armor. Spriggans. A species that could freely change their size from small to large. They were fundamentally a good species, and evil Spriggans were very rare. That said, both good and bad Spriggans were unmanageable when they went berserk. Zosha. Carnivores with the upper bodies of beastmen. They were relatives of centaurs and orthros. They wore plate armor and carried round shields. They had no special abilities, but they were heavy cavalry with the savagery and strength of wild beasts. Just one of them was very powerful, and the orthros often relied on them. It was apparently a relationship like the one between goblins and hobgoblins. However, due to their lack of special abilities, they were not very strong foes against adventurers who could cast the fly spell. Still, in a head-to-head clash, even Orichalcum-ranked adventurers would have a hard time. According to the Sorcerer King, your base might be under surveillance, right? Then if they know how many troops we have, they might not send too many troops over. That works to our advantage. However, there's a problem. Food. Yes. While the priests can make food, they can only make very little even after exhausting their mana. They also can't feed like Demi-Humans. Remedios and Gustavo had looks of distaste on their faces. All 3 of them knew that Demi-Humans preyed on humans. Therefore, even if they tried to starve the invading Demi-Humans, they all knew they would lose in the end. That was because the Demi-Humans' prison camps could be considered larders for them. Go check how long our food can hold. We're checking already. We're also looking for any blacksmiths who might be able to modify the Demi-Human gear for use by humans. I expected nothing less of you, Captain. The 3 of them continued discussing their preparations for the siege. After another hour, they reached a conclusion which all of them could accept, and the 3 of them smiled. All right, then let's prepare for the siege. 1 week later, as their food supplies dwindled and it was about time for them to move, the Demi-Human army appeared from over the horizon. However, it was a massive army whose scale far exceeded their expectations. Ains looked out over the city, which was in a panic over the appearance of the Demi-Human army, and he slowly collapsed. This was not a figure of speech. Ains's heart and soul were stretched to their limits by fatigue, and despite his undead nature, he fell to his knees from mental exhaustion and grabbed his face. What should I do? What should I do after this? Fundamentally, Ains had been following Demiurge's script. Of course, not every word and action was planned, so he had improvised a fair bit, but even so, Ains was counting on following the developments of Demiurge's plan. Or rather, the problem was that he had improvised too much. Frankly speaking, the operational directives he had gotten from Demiurge basically said, "Please adapt to the situation," and other things like that. This was too much. That was what Ains had thought when he first looked at the instructions. If Ains was an excellent person, perhaps he could follow those directions and play the role of a perfect Sorcerer King. However, much to his regret, Ains's abilities were perfectly normal, or perhaps even worse than that. Therefore, Ains had gotten into a spirited debate with Demiurge over the matter. He recalled things going like this. Ains had pleaded, "I don't understand, write in more detail," whereupon Demiurge had humbly replied with, "How could I possibly do something that rude to the sagacious Ains Sama?" And this had led to an intense back and forth. He had roped Albedo into this battle halfway, and Ains, who had begun at a great disadvantage, had finished at a complete loss. And so, the operational directives granting him complete discretion ended up in Ains's hands. If this was a prank on Demiurge's part, he might be able to deal with it in some other way, but this was the fruit of his subordinates' trust and respect. In particular, that was made very clear by such pronouncements as, "You will surely be able to reach a better conclusion, Ains Sama. How could one as insignificant as myself bind you with my words and deeds? If you went by common sense, why would the king of another country come over alone? What an unreasonable argument. Still, I've come all this way. Although I stirred up some problems along the way and got careless a few times, I still came all this way. He did not believe in the gods, but he wanted to pray to them with all his heart. Couldn't Demiurge and Albedo consider my abilities before dumping missions onto me? Being asked to do the impossible made his motivation shrivel up. Alright, pull it together, me. It'll be easier after I get through this. Ains poured his strength into his legs, and then he stood up.